says Ivan Antonovich Shaporev, a participant in World War II. He went to the front at 18, a graduate of the Ulyanovsk Tank School, a junior lieutenant, commander of a tank platoon. In the first battles near Moscow, he entered on a T-34 and later fought on a KV-1 as part of the Guard's 28th Separate Heavy Tank Breakthrough Regiment. For his combat path, he was awarded the Order of the Red Star and other awards. He went through the fire of tank attacks, burns, captivity, and Gestapo interrogations, but he preserved the honor of an officer and returned home. I was born in Altai Krai into a peasant family. I started school early, at 6. Studying was not easy. Illnesses often plagued me, especially in middle school. In the 7th grade, I went through the program twice because I often had to leave classes. My nails would turn blue, my temperature would rise, I would start shaking, and my father agreed to let me repeat the year. That's how I managed to finish school properly. In 9th grade, I had a dream, to enter a flight school in Bernal. I successfully passed the commission, but at the very last moment, I got tonsillitis. The ENT doctor said, "What kind of pilot would you be if your throat is sore? It's cold up there." That's how my dream of the sky ended. Most of the guys after 9th grade went to work as elementary school teachers, but that didn't appeal to me. I wanted to link my life with the Army. At first, I thought about entering a naval college, but in 1941, recruitment there was no longer being conducted. At the military commissariat, I was advised to go to the Ulyanovsk Tank School, and I went there consciously with a firm intention to become a military man. When I was studying at the school, a letter came from my mother. My father was missing in action near Moscow. My heart was breaking, and I wrote a report twice, asking to be sent to the front as a private. The head of the school, Colonel Kashuba, a hero of the Soviet Union, a strong man who had lost a leg in the Finnish War, met me at night when I was on duty as an orderly. He said, "Why would you go as a private? What's the point? First finish school, the war will be long, you'll get enough fighting then." 6 months later, we had an early graduation. Priority was given to those who had entered after serving, those with experience as sergeants and starshini. I was in that group and received my first officer rank, junior lieutenant. Studying at the Ulyanovsk Tank School provided a strong foundation. No unnecessary theory. Everything was only what was essential for war: tactics, drill, military affairs, materiel, handling weapons, machine guns, cannons. This school was considered one of the best in the Union, and it was not in vain that it later became a Guards unit. Its graduates distinguished themselves in battle, for which the school was awarded an order. I am proud to have been a graduate. After graduation, I was sent to the Reserve 10th Tank Regiment. In April 1942, our marching company received tanks. It was a difficult year. Factories in the West were destroyed, those in the East were just starting up, and there was a shortage of equipment. Not regiments or brigades were formed, but separate battalions. That's how we found ourselves in the first battles. In the spring of '42, we were loaded onto a train in Gorky, and we received tanks in Sormovo. We got good T-34s. In Moscow, we were unloaded early in the morning, drove in a column through the streets of the capital, showing our strength, and then reloaded and headed further to Vyshny Volochysk. There we made a 100-kilometer march from the road and took up defensive positions. My platoon of 3 vehicles was tasked with striking the Germans' left flank. At dawn we moved out, but only my tank reached the point. The others fell behind, so I had to attack alone. We advanced through bushes, reaching the positions of mortar crews. We didn't yet know they were ours and moved on. It got dark, and figures appeared ahead. The crew demanded to open fire, but I forbade it. What if they're ours? Only when machine guns and mines struck us did it become clear that the enemy was ahead. I closed the hatch and led the vehicle forward. We drove the Germans into an open field, firing from the cannon and machine guns. The crew worked smoothly, and in the end, with 1 tank, we disrupted the enemy's defenses, captured the village of Nikolskoye, and completed the platoon's mission. The others attacked head-on and lost 2 vehicles, but our flank maneuver decided the outcome of the battle. After the battle, I walked across the field. Before me lay dead Germans, strong young men, their hair rustling in the wind. I was only 18 years old, and then I realized for the first time that it was I, with my own hands, who had killed them. The fear of the dead was a difficult ordeal. For that battle, I was awarded the Red Star. But at that moment, I didn't feel pride, rather bewilderment. I wasn't scared. I acted calmly, without panic, simply carrying out the task. Apparently, that's my character. In critical moments, I only become more composed. After the first battle, we returned to the assembly point. Ammunition was replenished, fuel was brought in, machine gun magazines reloaded. In the morning, we were ordered to move out again, but it had rained during the night and water had gotten into my tank. The mechanic reported that the engine was overheating. It was clear the radiator was leaking. I decided to stop and report the malfunction. I approached the command. Major Karras, the commissar, deputy political officer, and political instructor were having breakfast. I reported that the tank was not ready for battle. Karras, in a rage, reached for his pistol. I pulled out my revolver. "Stop the hysteria." The commissar intervened, reminding him that I had been accepted as a party candidate the day before and recommended. They called the company technician. I suggested either the hoses were leaking or the radiator was punctured. I offered to get a spare radiator. We drove up to the vehicle, and it turned out that the radiator was indeed punctured by shrapnel. The Smersh officer who was there said, "Vanya, that saved you." He still suspected I was faking it. I replied sharply, "It's my crew and I'm responsible for them." The radiator was replaced and we went back into battle. That's when I first realized how harshly the command was prepared to act. For any delay, they could shoot you on the spot. An error or equipment malfunction was not taken into account. It was easier to blame everything on cowardice, and only chance saved me and the crew. We were transferred to the Northwestern Front, to the area of the Demyansk Pocket. Heavy fighting was taking place there, the first major encirclement of the Germans. We supported the Marines near the village of Velikoi. I urged the sailors to wear helmets to protect themselves, but they waved it off. "We are sailors." They took off their pea coats, tucked their capless hats, and went into attack. Many of them died in vain because of this bravado. Our battalion suffered constant losses. Soon it was sent for regrouping. My tank remained intact, but I was appointed deputy company commander. When we were heading to the rear, we were unexpectedly turned towards the Valdai region. Old BT-5 and BT-7 tanks were stationed there. I still didn't believe they could give them to us, but an order came to attack the Germans at Lichkovo station with these vehicles. The Germans had set up a fortified area. We moved into the attack. My first tank caught fire from a heavy machine gun. I switched to the second and went forward again, but it also burst into flames. The Germans were firing incendiaries, and I myself was on fire. My face, hands, all burned. But we still took the station, although we lost a huge number of vehicles. I was sent to the infirmary. For 2 weeks, I could barely speak, only grunt. My face was covered in burns and blisters. They treated me with streptocid, bandaged me, and tied me down at night so I wouldn't scratch off scabs in my sleep. These medicines saved thousands of lives and mine too. Since then, my beard grows in patches and I've shaved only with an electric razor my entire life. After treatment, we were again transported through Moscow. I stayed there for a day, wandering around the city, but I almost got into trouble. My comrade didn't have his documents, he was detained, and I myself almost ended up arrested. Only the intervention of the commissar saved us from a ridiculous accusation, so I returned to duty. After treatment and returning to duty, we were sent to a camp near Patushki where reorganization was taking place. Here our unit was awarded the title of Guards, the 28th Separate Heavy Tank Breakthrough Regiment. I was appointed commander of a heavy tank platoon. The command paid great attention to discipline. I was on duty at the base, and when soldiers tried to get to the dining hall through the tank parking lot, I scolded them. The new unit commander, Lieutenant Colonel Kalinin, initially gave me 5 days of arrest, but later he understood that I had been shell-shocked and stuttered, and to speak without a hitch, I would start with a strong word. He apologized, although he couldn't cancel the punishment. We developed a normal relationship with him. He turned out to be from the same region, also a Siberian. Guests were expected at the regiment for the presentation of the Guards banner. The question arose what to treat them with. It was wartime, there was no food. I was chosen to go to Moscow to the Krasny Oktyabr factory for provisions. I went to the director and the trade union committee secretary, explained the situation. They looked at my burnt face and averted their eyes. But after listening, they decided to help. I was given everything necessary to properly receive the guests. I took the cargo to the unit, and then I lingered a bit longer in Moscow, allowing myself a break. Soon, incessant battles began. We received new tanks, KV-1s, built with funds from the residents of Moscow's Dzerzhinsky district. These vehicles were called Dzerzhinets. I was again appointed platoon commander, but the joy of replenishment didn't last long. An order came to immediately go on the offensive. Many tanks, including mine, had their Bendix drives fail on startup, and they couldn't go into battle. I had to get into another cruise vehicle myself and lead the column forward. We advanced in a blizzard, in complete darkness. We didn't see the front line until we got stuck in the trenches. One of my tanks tipped over and got stuck. Vasily Artemenko, our deputy political officer, came to it and tried to pull it out, but it didn't work. Soon the battle raged, the turret in my tank jammed, and 3 crew members were wounded. Only the mechanic and I were left, with just 1 revolver and grenades. During the night, we fended off the Germans several times, and by morning, the mechanic was dead. Then junior mechanic Grigor from another stuck tank managed to reach me. We held out together until the enemy blew up the vehicle and forced us to abandon it. That's how I found myself surrounded and soon captured. After the tank was blown up and our unsuccessful attempts to hold out, Grigor and I were surrounded by the Germans. His fate was soon lost, and I was taken to a village and then to Oriel prison. Gestapo interrogations began. At first they were polite, offering tea or ersatz coffee, but as soon as I dug in and said nothing, the beatings began. They broke my nose. They beat me professionally. They tried to find out the composition of our tank's armor, but I couldn't and wouldn't say anything. I'm not a chemist, I'm an officer. I didn't know any technical secrets. The most valuable thing for me was my party card. I hid it in the lining of my trousers, having ripped open the seam. If the Germans had found it, I would have been finished. But the search was superficial, and the document was preserved. Later, I was transferred to a prisoner of war camp in Bobruisk, then to Germany. There, for the first time, I met Vlasov's agitators. They tried to persuade the prisoners to betray, promising better food, a better life. But those who agreed were strangled in their barracks by their own men during the night. None of our group went with them. I was transferred to an officers' team for land reclamation in Kirchdorf. We set up an underground party bureau, and since I had kept my party card, I became its secretary. Lieutenant Colonel Markelov, former chief of staff of Chernyakovsky's tank army, was with us. He kept our spirits up. We received information through friendly Austrian guards who themselves understood that the war was nearing its end. Life in the camp was hard. Hunger, disease, constant searches. But we held on. I preserved both the party and my loyalty to the oath. In captivity, I never willingly raised my hands. For me, it was a matter of honor. In the spring of '45, the Americans liberated us. They gathered prisoners at the Belgian border. I filled out a questionnaire, honestly stating that I had kept my party card. The colonel personally checked and appointed me head of camp security, saying, "I won't put just anyone in charge of security." That's how I met the end of the war. After liberation, we were sent to Frankfurt an der Oder, where we spent several weeks. The American colonel promised to help me return home sooner, but soon all of us were transferred back. And from then on, we moved through Soviet filtration camps. There, everyone was checked, and they found out how they had behaved in captivity. Fortunately, we stuck together, knew about each other, and no one could say anything bad. This helped many avoid suspicion and repression. Upon returning to the Soviet Union, I immediately encountered distrust. My name was not on the voter list for the Supreme Soviet elections. I insisted, and only the next day was I added back. It was clear they were being overcautious. If he was a prisoner of war, then he was suspect. It was also difficult with the party card. I went to the district committee to pay off my party dues for the years of captivity. I presented the card in perfect order. The district committee confirmed my right to pay, but the secretary suddenly declared, "I don't believe you. How could you have kept your party card for 2 years in captivity?" I flared up and said that even here in freedom, one could lose a card if one behaved like an animal. For such words, I could have been imprisoned, but I got away with it then. I was given a job in the district executive committee as head of the cultural and educational department. A year later, I was sent to a wheat collective farm in the wilderness. There I encountered devastation. The tractor was dead, the seeder was useless, and on top of that, there was an order to use only it. The land was drying up, the harvest would be lost. I gathered people, and we started sowing by hand. Then I restored an old thresher, and we produced bread. But again, denunciations and inspections appeared. I even had to give flour directly to the collective farmers so that the grain wouldn't be stolen. In the end, we met and exceeded the plan, but the constant conflicts with the authorities did not disappear. Life after the war was difficult, but I understood that I had to keep fighting. For the harvest, for my name, and for the memory of having gone through the war honestly. In 1954, I worked as deputy director at Gorky Park. I received a good salary, but I often suffered from headaches, consequences of concussions and burns. An exiled party committee worker, also a frontline soldier, was sent to me as director. We both clutched our heads in pain, but continued to work. Later, he left for a pedagogical institute and persuaded me to also apply. I passed the exams and scored 23 out of 25 points. But at the interview, the rector said, "You old-timers apply, and then you drop out. Because of you, a school student won't get in." It became clear to me, for them, I was a burden, even though I had gone through the war, burned in a tank, sat in the Gestapo. Still, I became a student and received an education. Later, a colleague, also a former tank driver, collected materials about veterans for an album. My photos were also in it. This album was shown in Moscow, and there I was suddenly mistaken for someone who had died in the Battle of Kursk. They thought my grave was known while I was working at the institute at the time. Unexpectedly, my comrades in arms found me in Moscow. I heard familiar voices, saw Artemenko and others I had fought with. We embraced, disbelieving that we were alive and had met decades later. For them, I had risen from the dead. I often remembered the war, how every minute tested people's strength. Some it broke, others it tempered. I kept my party card, preserved my honor and loyalty. But in the post-war years, the struggle didn't end. I had to prove again and again that I was worthy of trust, that I hadn't betrayed or surrendered. This was no easier than in battle. When I met Artemenko and other veterans, it turned out that fate had dealt with everyone differently. Artemenko, after my captivity, commanded a tank company at the Battle of Kursk. He received an order to hold a crossroads until the main forces arrived. His company was decimated. He himself was wounded by a bullet in the temple, lay unconscious, stripped. Our burial teams took him for dead. He woke up in the hospital on the 21st day and survived by a miracle. His party card was taken by the party organizer then, and after the war, the card was returned with all its marks. That's how the story of 2 party cards was born, which I later wrote a short story about. We also recalled everyday episodes of the war. For example, how we once captured a German field kitchen. It was real wealth. First, second, and third courses, plus motorcycles. Our cook then said, "Shaporev's crew always gets the best." Even in war, there were such moments. I often thought about the Germans. Strong, persistent opponents, sometimes to the point of fanaticism. When we were blown up twice in the tank, I understood that fate was balancing on the edge. If we had stayed another day, everything would have ended differently. Sometimes I wondered, was it chance, fate, or a test I had to go through? Soldiers were different. Among commanders, there were those who, in a drunken stupor, threw battalions into senseless attacks. But there were also ordinary people, sincere and honest. I remember a strong, broad-shouldered guy came up to me and asked to be my mechanic. Before the war, he had been a tractor driver, but he got a failing grade on a driving test and wasn't accepted. He recounted how the instructor made him turn on ice. The tank skidded and crashed into a tree. I believed him, insisted that he be taken into the crew. Then the company commander grumbled that I was digging my own grave, but I said, "I'm going into battle, so I must choose who to trust." That was my understanding of responsibility. Over the years, I realized my whole life has been a struggle for the right to remain myself. In war, in captivity, after the war. I did not surrender to the enemy and did not allow myself to be humiliated at home. Although it was difficult, I lived my life in such a way that I felt no guilt, neither before myself nor before the memory of fallen friends. Fate threw me from the frying pan into the fire, from Altai Krai to the fronts of Moscow and Demyansk, from tank attacks to Gestapo basements, from captivity in Germany to returning home, where I had to prove my honesty all over again. I kept my party card, maintained my loyalty to the oath, and did not stain myself with betrayal. But upon returning, I faced suspicion and distrust, and that was no easier than enduring battle. I saw death too closely. I saw strong men fall on the battlefield, how my comrades burned in tanks, how sailors died going into attack with only their capless hats. I saw how life and death swapped places in a second. A step aside, and another dies instead of you. These images are impossible to forget. But there were other memories too. Sharing the last bread, helping each other in captivity, how simple Austrian guards whispered news from the front so we wouldn't lose hope. All of this gave strength. After the war, I tried to live by the same principles. To be honest, to take responsibility, not to be afraid to go against injustice, even if it threatened trouble. I knew life could only be lived that way, otherwise it loses its meaning. Today, looking back, I realize I remained a living witness of a time when a person was tested for strength every minute. My legacy is not orders and awards, but the memory that I went through fire and captivity, preserved my honor and loyalty, and returned home a human being. My life after the war continued to be as difficult as it was at the front. I worked, studied, uplifted collective farms, taught at the institute, met with comrades in arms. I was considered dead, buried in absentia, and then they were surprised that I stood before them alive. I proved again and again that I was worthy of trust, that I did not break in battle, nor in captivity, nor under the blows of distrust at home. Everything I did as best I could. At 18, I first led a tank into attack and understood the price of human life. In captivity, I kept not only my party card, but also the faith that I would return. At home, I fought for the right to be heard, for the right to work and live honestly. Much remained in my memory: the faces of fallen comrades, burning tanks, the stern and kind people I met on my path. All of this shaped me, made me who I am. And if I am asked what is most important in this life, I will answer: to preserve dignity and loyalty to oneself even when it seems that all is lost. I lived the life of a frontline soldier, a prisoner, a peasant, a student, a teacher. And each stage of it was a test. But I always remembered that I had to keep moving forward. Just like then, in the tank, under bullets, without turning back or giving up.